Well, hello and welcome to the Creating Connections podcast, where I bring voices and perspectives from people who are making a difference for children's learning and development. I'm Rachel Stewart, and I'm passionate about connecting with people to share experiences and learn from each other how we can best support children to thrive. In this series of the podcast, we are exploring successful leaders in education so you can learn from a diverse range of people what makes a successful leader and how you can take their learnings and apply them to your leadership. Today, I'm introducing you to an education consultant, Dr. Paul Teys. With a career spanning 4 decades, Dr. Paul is an expert in the educational leadership space. His journey of 36 years in middle and executive leadership roles and as principal across diverse schools in 3 states in Australia has shaped the educational experiences of countless learners and educators. In this episode, we're going to explore his work in guiding other leaders towards success and what he believes needs to be a focus in education as society and humanity shifts the way we live, learn, and work. So I would like to welcome Dr. Paul Teys to the podcast today. Well, welcome to the podcast today. It's really great to have you on as a guest, and with so many years' experience as a leader in education, I'm really interested to learn more about your journey and how you came to become a consultant in education and really guiding the leadership journey of other people who are striving to be good leaders in what is probably one of the most challenging professions, I would say, particularly in the world that we're living in today. So perhaps we can start with where you began in education and then how you actually work with leaders now and sharing your expertise with new and emerging leaders.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. And thanks for the opportunity that you're giving me this morning. It certainly appealed to me when your invitation or request came through to spend some time with you discussing leadership. My journey started, it's a bit corny almost, Rachel, but when I was about 7, I had this aspiration that I wanted to be a school principal, funnily enough. And to keep it short, that was because the principal at the time, the late John Radcliffe, that I had, was an outstanding principal and person. So that's where it started. And so then through school, I was on this steady journey to be a teacher. So I chose a Bachelor of Science first up with a major in mathematics, then did diploma in education, a little bit different in the 70s in the way that people came into teaching through academic qualifications, but that's what I chose to do. And straight from the University of Queensland, I was accepted to a position at Fairholme College in Toowoomba with the late Alan Farragher, a mentor and absolute inspiration, to be a mathematics and science teacher. So I started at an all-girls school, Presbyterian Church School, in the 80s, and it was a wonderful introduction to teaching and education and all that was possible in schools. And I had a pretty rapid trajectory to leadership because of Alan. It was about 4 years in that I was offered the position of head of science at that school. I taught physics, chemistry, and mathematics. It's interesting because I think leaders are really do have a great impact on somebody's professional journey. I wanted to be the head of mathematics because mathematics was my subject, but Alan had other ideas. He was headhunting a great mathematician from the area out of the public system to join us at Fairholme College, and he had Trevor earmarked to be the head of mathematics, and he saw a role for me, knowing I was aspirational in leadership, to be the head of science, and he felt that he was creating a middle leadership team that was going to make a big difference to the outcomes of the students. So these sorts of decisions and the processes that Alan took to make decisions really impacted on me. So I went from there to be head of curriculum. In the 80s, that's the equivalent of your director of teaching, learning, pedagogy. It was all wrapped up in one. So I moved into head of curriculum. And then when Alan decided that he would retire, we had an 11-year partnership. I had no intention of leaving Fairholme. I could see myself retiring there. It was such a great school with all these amazing opportunities. But once Alan decided to leave, it was an opportunity for me to say, well, do I stay forever? And there was a new appointment made. And it was clear that the new appointee, and I won't mention their name, but different sets of values, different beliefs, different approaches. And I thought, oh, well, this is a good opportunity for me to look at higher levels of leadership. So I moved from there to be the deputy principal, head of secondary school in Queensland. That's year 7 to 12 at AB Patterson College on the Gold Coast. And another great mentor there was Dawn Lang. And Dawn offered different, I suppose, different leadership behaviours and functions and performance areas than what Alan did. And I won't go into that, but Dawn was very focused on outcomes, very focused on achievements, very focused on data. And so that was a great contribution to my growth in terms of what Dawn brought to my leadership that Alan probably didn't place as higher emphasis on. So as deputy, I learned a bit. And after 4 years, a colleague at that school encouraged me to apply for the principal of Moreton Bay College in Brisbane. I was 37 and got that position, which
That's
I was
quite
immense.
young, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I was probably too young, Rachel, as I reflect, because we'll talk about this, I'm sure, in the podcast about how your values and your approaches to leadership change, and they did change a lot. So I was there at age of 37 and had a good innings at Moreton Bay College then before moving down to be the principal at Hunter Valley Grammar School down here in New South Wales. And I was there for about 15 years as the principal. I think we were very successful as a team. That is board, executive leadership, myself and community. That worked really well. And I know we'll talk about community because that's one of your themes, and it's a wonderful work that you do in the area of engaging communities and valuing partnerships with community. So that was great for me. And then I decided I'd go into semi-retirement. I don't like to use the word, but basically I wanted to scale back, my days and my work, and I wanted to work for myself. At the end of the day, I just wanted to be accountable for what I did. And I went into semi-retirement, but I picked up 2 schools. They were to be one-term contracts, schools that needed an interim principal in the transition. They were meant to be one term. One was in Canberra and one was in Coffs Harbour. They were both Steiner schools, but as it turned out, they ended up being year-long appointments. And look, for where I was at, it was probably too long, Rachel. It was probably too long for the community as well, if I was honest. When you go into it, you're thinking one term, maybe 2, and it turns out to be a year. It's hard to sit on your hands, so you start to get involved in things you probably should leave alone in an interim capacity. So that ended up in 2022. So last year was the first to close out this question. Last year, then 2023 was my first year where I was focused solely on being a consultant, and my core work is basically coaching and mentoring principals and executive leaders aspiring to be principals or to be as successful as they possibly can. So there's a lot of that work that I do, but also do work in a year-long leadership development programs for middle and senior leaders. And, this is an area which we have typically neglected, the development of our middle leaders in schools. So I'm working with middle and leaders across a few schools, and I really enjoy that work. So the year-long programs are anchored on workshops, but it's beyond the workshops and the webinars where the real work is done, where I'm available for coaching, Q&A sessions, email dialogue, a whole range of things. So it's good work because I can't say I suit myself, because you know what it's like in the consulting business. It's still a business and you still have to maintain an income and so on. But I can be a bit picky and choosy as to how I spend my day and who I work with, and what sort of work that I choose to do. So I'm really enjoying it. It's in my second year now, where I've been focused solely on my consulting business, as well as writing a book and another one about to come out. Ready, should be out with Amba Press in June, I hope.
You and I are the crazy ones who've gone back for seconds writing another book.
And for the same publisher,
yes,
Rachel. But after the first one, it's sort of pretty motivating, isn't it, to think, well, I did that and that was a bit daunting, and I probably, wasn't expecting it to go as well as it did. And because of the great success with Alicia Cohen and Amba Publishing, I thought, no, I'm going to do it again, take another book. So that's what I'm up to now.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And we'll get on to the book during our session today. Just from your introduction, I love to hear the background stories of everyone I'm interviewing because it seems to me that well, it paints a picture where you are now and where you've come from, and what I gauged from just how young you were when you went into leadership, and I'm seeing this with a lot of people I'm interviewing that uh, you either get tapped on the shoulder as a leader and people see potential in you as a leader, or you have aspirations to be a leader, and then obviously your mentors see that in you as well. How would you, and obviously now in your role, you're supporting middle leadership because you see the need for extra support in that area, and there's not a lot of training available for middle leadership, and to try and help those people who want to aspire to be leaders. Do you think that that does stem from when you were younger and you potentially were almost thrown into the leadership role fairly soon into your career, and that is sort of, it comes full circle, I guess, in terms of your passion for what you're doing in your consulting now? Do you think that that was one of the major influences as to why you're actually in, I guess, helping to support those leaders now?
Yeah, look, great question. And I really like it because that is exactly what has happened. I had a wonderful career, was supported by not just mentors, but colleagues in other schools. Before I was a principal, I had principals in other schools. I visited many schools. So I had these rich opportunities given to me by people in education. I grew up thinking educational leaders are so generous with their time. They give so much to people aspiring to leadership and to grow leaders. So it's a bit cliched, but I'm actually giving back. I see there's a lot of charitable work that I do as well, where I'm not charging. It's not part of my consultancy. I make myself available and accessible to people so that I can share what I learned, the practical strategies and insights and practices over 40 years. And so that's part of what I do. But the thing is, I think that probably the core is to do with the fact that I was a pretty eager beaver. I was really passionate. I had all these ideas, but I definitely lacked the depth of experience and the nuanced understanding of leadership that I've got today. You can't put an old head on young shoulders, but I like to think that, I might be that sage advice, that wise sort of person working with young enthusiasts. Well, they don't have to be young, but new to leadership, enthusiastic about leadership, got all these ideas, want to get projects up and running. And I'm trying to put a bit of a wise head, now on those shoulders. So that I like the way you frame that question, because I think that is what I'm doing. So, my vision when I started leadership was more about directing and implementing decisions, motivated by a desire to achieve results and make an impact quickly. I mean, I was at Fairholme College, and one year we were listed as one of the top 5 academic schools in the state. That stuff, Rachel, was really motivating to me. But in my tail end at Hunter Valley Grammar School, that was far less important to me than a holistic education and the quality of the graduate. So that's how people change in their leadership journey. So I'm at that stage now where I want to bring all the experiences I have to support and develop leaders, not wanting to knock their enthusiasm for a sort of a results-driven approach, but focusing on people, focusing on experiences, focusing on relationships, empowering others, creating an environment where people can thrive and contribute their best work. So I see myself now and in the later stages as a facilitator and coach, as much as a decision maker.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and just how your leadership style has changed over that time, moving from that focus on results, results, results,
Yeah.
and now more a holistic approach. Do you think that in your over the lifetime of your career, do you think that you've seen a gradual shift towards that approach with most leaders, or are you finding that there's still work to be done in terms of leaders leading with heart, I guess, and knowing the people in their community and really knowing the students and their needs and focusing on that rather than just, we see a lot of schools still promoting themselves based on ATAR scores and those sorts of things and using that in their marketing, when really it is about education really is about people and relationships, isn't it? And
Mm.
particularly the relationship between teachers and students, because we know that students learn better when they have good relationships with their teachers. And also, obviously, my passion, the relationships with parents and how we can work together more effectively to support students. Do you think that there's still a lot of work to be done in helping leaders see the value of, the human approach, the more human and holistic approach to leadership?
Look, Rachel, that's excellent. The shift has already happened, I believe. There's been and I don't like to use the word paradigm shift, but there absolutely has been a paradigm shift in the way principals and executive leaders see their work and their roles. And that is about people well-being, supporting relationships and ensuring that teachers have quality relationships with children before they begin the learning journey. I think the shift has happened. I think we've got some way to go because we've got these forces at play which harm that leadership approach, and those forces are the Commonwealth government maintaining the My School website, for example. They argue that parents should be able to have one place where they can get all this data about schools and make good school choice, but it's promoting data for purposes of comparison. It's competition. NESA, for example, and the preoccupation with HSC results in New South Wales and the papers producing league tables and rankings and all that sort of thing. So we, as principals, we've got ourselves in this dilemma. We know what our job is and we know what the purpose of schooling is, but you also have to play this game because there's forces at play that put so much emphasis on results for purposes of comparing schools, that creates a dilemma and a tension. So I think there still is a lot of work to be done, but breaking down some of that bureaucratic understanding and thinking about what's the purpose of schooling. PISA results, for example, NAPLAN results. I mean, honestly, I didn't need NAPLAN as a principal for me to know how my year 3 students were going and where we needed to invest time and resources and energy. We were tracking student data and outcomes long before NAPLAN was ever created. But the government sees that there's a weakness across sectors, so therefore they've got to put something in place. I have to stop sort of bagging the government here, Rachel. But I think that is a dilemma for school leaders who understand the moral purpose of leadership against this competitive environment that has been created by the need to keep data and report data. Yeah. So
Yeah, it
I
really
think,
is. It really is a challenge because what it's doing is positioning parents in a way that we don't want them to be focusing on just results of their children. And that's causing, I've just been observing some parent Facebook groups to get to do some further research into what parents are talking about. And it's amazing how many are using tutors outside of school from the age of, well, I think it was grade 2 students to try and help them get ahead with their learning. And that really disturbs me because basically I think the whole NAPLAN focus on results, ATAR scores is positioning parents in, to just focus on homework, extra work for their kids. And that's not healthy for our children. And it's not healthy for the school community either, because then it makes it difficult for schools to live up to their expectations in a lot of ways, but also to help them understand that there are other ways that we can support children's learning without focusing on just results, but looking at the progress. And you mentioned that you were tracking their data and you were tracking, how they're actually going with their learning and how you can actually position parents differently to focus more on the progressive development of their children rather than those end results. Is
You're
that
right.
something that you work with new leaders around as well?
Um, at leadership level, I do, but the work really needs to be done at the teacher level. For a parent, that if they leave the school, in a sense of not wanting to work with the school and go to other agencies, they're missing out on the greatest resource, which is the child's teacher. And the best advice I can give to parents is build relationships with your children's teachers of mutual respect and teamwork. That'll get the best results for the children, because that's what's happening now, because the teacher's getting marginalized because of the compliance regime. When I started teaching, I had the joy of getting to know kids and working with them in a subject like physics. But I spent all of my time, working with the children in the classrooms and then at lunch times and outside, supporting their learning. But progressively, the teacher plans got more dense and more comprehensive. Assessments became more complex and more complicated. The risk management's had to be, and they're probably all appropriate, but what it's done is drain the teachers of the joy of teaching. So
Yeah.
rather than working with kids now, they're working with documentation, or they're working with record keeping, and they can't even have a conversation with a parent without leaving that conversation and sitting down and writing up a set of journal notes in case they have to use them at some stage in the future.
Yeah.
Now, it's a complex issue, but the simplification of it is that teachers have lost their energy, for the craft of teaching and learning, because they've been completely drowned by the bureaucracy that requires so much of them from a compliance regime. So as a principal, I did everything I could to unshackle teachers from that burden, and that was they appreciated that. So it kept them effectively energetic and enthusiastic about their teaching. It wasn't this oppressive regime of record keeping and documentation, as intense as it has become.
Yeah, they don't get a chance to create the connections that they need with their students. And I suppose the increase in the number of children who are presenting with neurodiverse learning needs has also exacerbated that in terms of the reporting and the observations required of those children in each classroom. And yeah, I am hearing that a lot of the leadership teams are very, I suppose, burnt out from the amount of paperwork that they need to constantly be monitoring. And how do you support leaders that you work with to manage that and to, I suppose, release that pressure?
In part, it's a resourcing issue, that the identification of particular needs in children, we're much better at that, right? So we are able to, I don't like it, but there's a lot of labeling of behaviours. That in itself is problematic, but at least it puts the educators down a pathway of working with the children in a way that's going to produce some real positive results. But it's a resourcing thing. But when resourcing, and that's additional expertise onto teams, there are more, if you like, non-teachers in schools by proportion now than there were 20, 30 years ago. Credible number of supports in schools, but not in isolation of each other and in silos. They've got to work in teams. And so additional resourcing has to be available to the teachers, but the teachers retain the core role of educating the children. So I think that what leaders can do now is just to ensure that the resourcing goes directly to supporting the classroom teacher to do their work in the classroom with the children. So the professional development and training of teachers is very important, and that's not achieved through a one-off. So something like ADHD, for example, is a complex condition, for children to have. You don't upskill teachers by having a one-day seminar on it. Right?
No.
So a lot of the one-offs dressed up as PD aren't working. So but having people in schools with expertise in these areas to work alongside teachers and children within classrooms does work. So it's tough, because I know we were a school that got mentioned in Parliament by the number of special provisions children we had, and it was like we were getting beaten up by the Sydney Morning Herald over it as if it was some sort of bad thing. But all we had was a very good, well-resourced individual needs team who worked closely with teachers to ensure that we were doing the best for kids.
Yeah.
So how come that's a problem?
Yeah. Isn't that what it's about?
Exactly. And so we prided ourselves on the fact that we did have children on special provisions, which was it was authentic and it was valid. It was NESA provided the frameworks and the structures for schools to assess children. And we accessed those and the supports of the AOS, for example, to ensure that we were providing the very best. Because once you accept an enrolment, public, independent, Catholics, once you accept an enrolment, you've got a responsibility to educate.
Yes.
And I mean, one of the big problems is funding, of course, and there's some horrible debates which puts people at opposite ends of the spectrum, independent and public and all those sort of things. But appropriately resourced, we can support all children in their learning in our schools
Yep.
to help them grow and develop. But it's a really important partnership between the teacher, the child, and the parent. That's because while we say we have children for 8 hours, in a secondary school, the English teacher's only got the child for 50 minutes, maybe, each day of the week. So the parents are still so vital. They spend 12 hours of their day or so at home. So that's something I think that we could do much better at. If you're asking me about what enhancements or improvements we could make, I think it's the partnership with parents. And there are some social problems there and in terms of parents being able to access schools. But the problem is we're always asking parents to come to us.
Yes.
What we ought to actually be doing is having the educators go to the parents. No, you can't be visiting everyone's home all the time, but, you can actually, because parents still get pretty intimidated by teachers at schools. And so
Yes.
asking them to come in puts them a bit at edge, doesn't it, straight away? But there are other ways of reaching out to parents so they can retain some comfort and security in their own space.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that since the pandemic, there's always online connection. There's multiple ways to connect with families. It's more the mindset around parent involvement and parent engagement and the difference between reaching out to connect with parents where they are rather than expecting parents to come in, which, as we know, is quite challenging for a lot of parents, even, with full-time work and other
That's it.
responsibilities.
Yeah.
But I suppose I'm interested to learn what you're seeing in the schools that you're working with in how they are actually managing that and how they are skilling their staff to be able to connect with parents, because even though some parents fear coming into the school, there are a lot of teachers who are terrified of talking with parents, especially with all the bad press that we hear all the time about certain aggressive parents and the way that they're approaching advocacy for their children. Which, as we know, most parents don't really understand how to advocate effectively for their kids. They just want to ask questions and get information most of the time. And if they don't get that information, or if they're feeling confused or disempowered, then that's when the problems do start. So I'm really interested to hear what you're seeing happening in schools and where you think the challenges still are around staff preparation.
Yeah. So some of the work that I do, but it's really to support leaders who've already made this conscious decision about being a community leader. So, I think the first thing we can do in this space is to understand our communities, deeply understand the community's needs, their values, and their challenges, because they're all different. All schools have their own unique context, and it's important for leaders to understand that context. And that involves engaging with students, parents, staff, and local stakeholders. You can use surveys. I'm a great advocate of surveys, more so now, Rachel, than I was when I first started out, because I think it's one way that you can get feedback. Meetings are really good. Forums are good. Informal conversations, engaging in dialogue at sporting meets and choral festivals and all of that sort of thing. So I think the best approach that our leaders can take is to recognise and value the community's identity. It's crucial for building trust, and ensuring that any transformation efforts are going to be valued and respected. So I think that's a really important step as a coalition builder or a community leader, seeing yourself in that role. And that's about values too, isn't it? It's about values and beliefs, Rachel, without principals valuing their communities as having a role and a partnership to play. We don't need parents telling us how to teach, obviously, but what we do is we need their insights about their children and how they see them at home. And that's why parents have so much knowledge and awareness and understanding about what their kids do, what their likes are, what motivates them, what demotivates them. So there's a rich resource that we don't tap into particularly well. And that's largely, I think, because there are situations where that relationship gets very tense and almost toxic and almost hostile, and so that those few occasions where it might be problematic or disruptive, people draw a conclusion that that's the norm, but it's not. After all the time I've spent in schools, 95% of my interactions with parents have only ever been positive and healthy and affirming and encouraging. And those ones where they get a bit tricky, I looking back, accept that I contributed to that. There are times when it went bad. I could have managed it a lot better if I'd spent more time planning for the meeting, understanding the other person's context, understanding their demography, where they come from. So yeah, I think that there's just too many horror stories. So if I could use that word, that are putting people off from fully engaging. But I see leaders now, and I encourage leaders to get the teachers on the front foot and speak to parents as soon as there's an emerging issue. Nip it in the bud. And I despair when something gets to a deep situation where the enrolment's at risk and the parents go, well, how come I wasn't told? So that's something I don't think we've made great strides and gains in. I still think that and part of that is that teachers are so busy. When do accountants and lawyers and so on, not that this is not a disparaging remark, but they may have 5 or 10 clients in a day. They may meet with 10 clients in a week even. What is the secondary school teacher doing? They've got 160, maybe 200 clients, in terms of their children that they have to deal with. So there's no built-in time, is there, for the teacher to actually make time for the parents? So we've got an industrialized model of schooling still, which is not working when it comes to building relationships with our parents.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it is the system conditions, isn't it? And just not allowing that time to be able to connect. And I guess the teachers that do that, or the leaders that do connect, they see the value, as you mentioned. It's part of your value system. If you believe that it is a partnership, then you'll make the effort and be intentional in actually connecting with parents to be able to sort through any issues and challenges. How do you work with leaders in terms of, I suppose, in a lot of ways, their vulnerabilities around connecting with families as well, and without them taking on the many social issues that are happening in our world today, and the challenges that families are facing? And how do you work with leadership not to take on their shoulders all of those challenges or issues that others are facing? It takes a certain type of person to be able to remain grounded and stable and not be sort of, I guess, impacted in a detrimental way by the things that they're hearing about different things that are happening in families or different family situations. Is there a way that you support leaders to manage that aspect of the job?
Yeah, it certainly has to begin with your school's objects, your purpose, what it is that you do well. Where do you apply your energies based upon school values and beliefs, and that creates some sort of boundaries and a funnel, if you like, around what sorts of issues and concerns would teachers get involved in. Teachers and schools ought to get involved in any matter where the welfare of the child impacts their learning and engagement at school. So, I used to have these arguments with parents. Something would happen on a Saturday night and I would want to take some action, or get involved. And parents say, none of your business that happened on Saturday night. And I'd say, look, I'm sorry, it is, because for the first 2 days of this week, that's all those teenagers have talked about. They've been completely out of class. Their mind's been somewhere else. There's the bullying's occurring at school. So it is my problem and I'm going to step in. So I've always maintained that if it's impacting a child's accessibility to learning and their engagement with the school, we ought to be having conversations, with parents. But it's a dialogue that I never approach it from a punitive sense, but here, let's have a dialogue about these parties on the weekend, or about this social engagement, or about how much time, your daughter's spending preparing for the Taylor Swift concert, something like that. But I think that's where we can encourage our leaders to take up the dialogue, either directly or through their middle leadership teams with parents, so that it's just like a conversation the best you can. I've got some information I want to share. I think there's probably some things you might try or do. Keep me posted, keep me briefed, but we are concerned about it. That would be the first one. I think coming back, though, to the preconditions for leaders to actually manage all of this is to help them understand what the benefits are. There is evidence-based benefits of parental engagement with leaders, and the benefits comes to children, how it can improve student outcomes, higher attendance rates, enhance school community relationships, parents wanting to volunteer to coach sporting teams or be umpires or referees or take ensembles or lead public speaking in schools. So I think the first thing is just that whole awareness around there are benefits of having parents keenly involved in schools. The associations, the broader associations, I found parents were disengaging with. But if there was a support group for, band, for example, or soccer, they'd jump in and get involved, wouldn't they, if they felt that it was something where they could offer some expertise. So I like to work with leaders on the benefits. I don't want to overstate this, but the sort of cultural competency training, just some training of teachers around, not just the different cultures, but, what it means to be a parent. A lot of teachers enter the profession. They're not a parent for maybe 10 years, 15 years into their time. And, you got to walk in the shoes of a parent to understand exactly what you're dealing with. So I call it cultural competency, but it might be an overstatement of it. So that would be another area that I think is really important in developing your leaders around how they can work with parents. And then for me, I did a lot of modelling. So I think one of the principal and executive leaders' role is modelling the way to their staff and to parents in the community. A lot of principals they steer away from the concept that they could be a role model. But, I found the feedback that I got from students and parents and teachers was that I was modeling a whole range of things that I never stopped for a moment to think. I speak reasonably well in public, and I was always sort of regarded for being a good public speaker. And there were all these little eyes watching me, every time I went to the lectern, and they would tell me 3 or 4 or 5 years on, they could recall speeches and how it made them feel. So I think modelling is completely understated in terms of what our principals and executive leaders can do, because there's eyes on them all the time, always there's eyes on them.
Absolutely. Yeah, you made some really good points there. And I think just going back to that communication with parents and how important it is for them to be aware, for parents to be aware of letting the school know, if there is a big party on the weekend, if there was an incident, and just really keeping what we call the loop of communication going. And, even the fact that there were probably a lot of teenagers very distracted by the Taylor Swift concert recently, and just being aware of how that does actually impact their learning at school. And I think that that's an awareness piece for parents as well, but also what you mentioned about leaders and teachers understanding from a parent perspective and putting themselves in their shoes as to what they're dealing with in their lives and how we can support each other. And it's really about that, isn't it? And being mindful of each other and each of our distinctive roles.
And that's the important point there, distinctive roles. I didn't mention the Taylor Swift thing flippantly. I mean, here's a dilemma for a school principal, isn't it? That Taylor Swift's coming to town, and I'm not making any judgment about her or the quality of her music, but she's a phenomenon. And so here she's got her first concert in Sydney on a Friday night. It's a Friday night. And to get there was going to be a nightmare, and all the preparations and all that sort of thing. So here you got school principals grappling with this dilemma. Do they condone it, or do they oppose it? Do they insist that their children have to stay at school? Will there be consequences for leadership positions if they go to the table?
Yeah, and
All that's being played
the
out, and so,
backlash that would cause.
oh, incredible. So what do you do there? Do you take the hard line, or do you go, okay, this is a phenomenon, and children will have a rich experience from all of this. There might be some negatives come out of it. There could be some, people who end the night in a poor shape or whatever. But by and large, it was healthy, it's wholesome. There's a performer that performed nonstop for 3.5 hours and just
Demonstrating a very strong work ethic to
absolutely
the
all those
many
things.
young
Yeah, yeah,
women that
yeah.
went to the concert. But
That's right.
yeah,
So that
and
those sort of dilemmas are happening all the time as principals grapple with the internal school culture and
yeah,
what it stands for versus what's going on in, shall I say, the real world. And that's where parents can play a part, in the engagement with parents. So you philosophical, okay, children will go to Taylor Swift. This is what we like to see, so that
yeah.
they're not so exhausted for the whole week after that they're unproductive in schools,
And is that sort of leads to an interesting point about the tradition of
Mm,
schooling and the way that schools are structured and how adaptive they may need to be
mm,
to the change in our young people because obviously teenagers are always have always been into music and all those different things outside of school and that's where the influences outside of school are around is it 65 to 85%, and within the school environment it's around 20%. So is there, I suppose, opportunity for educators to look at the structures and see, okay, so these are the sorts of things that we're navigating with our teenagers, and we know they're going to be teenagers. They're
mm,
always going to be rebellion. There's always going to be, interest in different aspects of other culture, especially now with social media. How are we navigating that as leaders,
mm,
and how are we working with parents around those? Uh, I wouldn't say they're challenges. I would say that they're just those phases that teenagers go through.
mm,
And why are we surprised when they do go through those phases? Because it's always been happening.
mm,
And how much do schools need to sort of start to adapt to their other world and
mm.
sort of bring them together, integrate them more rather than them
Yeah,
being two separate
great.
places that they
Yeah,
habitate.
yeah.
Is that a word?
Yeah, yeah, habitate. Yeah, well, look, I've
Habitate.
used it. So if you and I have used it, Rachel, it's the word. I think that it's interesting, isn't it? Because I came through, period where when I first started, when I was in year 11 and 12, it was when calculators were first being introduced. So that was interesting in itself. But there's always been crazy fads, like the Rubik's Cube. I remember, so I didn't get involved in the Rubik's Cube, but I know some mates of mine at school, they were full on. Every lunch they would meet and they would be on their Rubik's Cube. Now, if they did that today, would people get uptight about it? Well, probably not. But if they're on their gaming device or something like that, everyone's getting uptight about it.
Yeah.
So I think that if you like, the preoccupation with a particular interest has always existed. The interest changes. Like mine was sport. I played too much sport. I didn't have any music in my life. But
Never
so
too
I
much
think
sport.
that's right. So it changes. So the answer, I think, and it's, of course, this has shifted, but it is the focus on a holistic education. Holistic meaning the whole child. So in
Yes.
a school, and I take your point earlier on. It's a real, it's a caution, isn't it? We can't solve all of the social ills that they exist. We need the institutions like health and clubs and societies and all that joining in, but so not to take on more than we should, but a holistic education that is looking at the whole child is more than an academic education. It's social, emotional, behavioural, artistic, linguistic, all those things. So that's the big shift that needs to happen. And once we make that shift, we understand that school is only a small part of, or a part of, a child's life. So that there are other things that are going on. So in the landscape in Australia, I think we need a holistic view of both the current challenges and the potential pathways for reform and go down that way. So a more holistic approach. I think there needs to be an enhanced focus on equity. We're not achieving that. The sort of raging debates, I suppose, or controversies around inclusion and diversity. are yet to really anchor in schools. But so there's that approach we now need, that there is not a one size fits all, or the education that we need to provide is dealing with an incredibly diverse society in this country. And I'm not sure we caught up with that yet, in pockets of excellence, but as a broad general approach to education in this country, I don't think we've got there. So I think inclusion and diversity is really important. And at a fundamental level, that's getting to know every child, and
And their
listening.
family.
Absolutely. So once again, it comes back to a bit of a central theme here, and that is that what is needed is for each child to feel they're known, they're understood, they're listened to, they have voice. And so if they're feeling discriminated against, or there's some prejudice happening, you don't solve that by getting all of year 8 together, or the secondary school in the auditorium and lecturing them. You do that by who listens, and what do they do at the time, and what's the follow up, and what's the care factor. So, I'm not trying to simplify it, but I think that's where the future lies, in terms of, because if you don't look after a young person's well-being and their identity and who they are, they can't come to learn. I don't know a kid who can sort of, switch identities. Oh, I'm now entering the, geography class, so I'll now become the geography student. It doesn't work that way. So before they can come to learn, we've got to be looking after their welfare and well-being. And so that means how we resource schools now is a bit different to what it used to be.
Yeah,
And
there's
in
a
the
lot
absence
of
of some of those institutions, we have to do it, don't we?
yeah, there's a lot of schools with quite large wellbeing departments
Mm,
now, particularly
mm,
secondary schools,
mm,
and on-site psychs and OTs and lots of
mm,
specialists. And I suppose you touched on it before, and I'd like to just explore this a little bit further with you, and that's the issue of bullying. And of course, bullying has always been around as well, for as long as I can remember. I was bullied at school myself, and no doubt just about every child has been bullied at some point. But it seems to be a really big challenge now, particularly now that we have social media, and it's happening outside of school a lot more than it perhaps was when we were young. And I'm wondering how schools are managing bullying as well. And I know that there's a lot of parents who worry about their children being bullied and how to support them at home as well. So, how are you supporting leaders around the issues of bullying, and what sort of resources have they had to put in place to be able to manage the extent of the bullying that's happening
mm.
now?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because parents want to know what they can do to support. I think that what I saw was that there was too much energy, time spent on the perpetrator, right? Now, not to say there shouldn't be appropriate consequences. There should be, but they shouldn't take a month of Sundays to get in place. So what we tended to do was we had the discipline policies, or the behavior management policies with all their consequences. And so there was a bullying incident happen. So everybody focuses on the bully, the investigation, when did it happen? And now you've got, of course, be so squeaky clean, because the Bush lawyer is going to fire up and challenge your consequences. So there's so much energy. And what was happening was that the victim was not being looked after.
Yes.
The victim might have been the first and last person to be spoken to often, and there's no dialogue along the way. So what I was encouraging my team to do was to give proper care and attention to the victim. Again, it's a time factor, but the victim was always very scared that they're somehow going to be further bullied or isolated, or the friendships. So there's so much work that had to be done, which I don't think was being done, out of time and out of the need to make sure that your investigation was squeaky clean with all the evidence. So even the institutions like the state-based ASs, for example, put a lot of time into how to conduct an effective investigation. And much of that curriculum didn't talk about the victim. So I
Mm,
think the changes in the curriculum now, that's the sort of bullying type, behavior management curriculum, is actually coming back to how do you deal with the victim. And that's where parents can help. So, like checking in. Have you spoken to your teacher about this? Have you spoken to your friends about this? So it often just gets wrapped up in this panacea called resilience, but it's actually not that. It's actually giving children voice and knowing who their trusted adults are, who they can speak to, and are they doing okay. So that's how I see it, Rachel, in terms of what we can do. Because if we do develop young people to understand that things will happen to them that make them upset and are really unpleasant, and how they can navigate that, then I think we'll see the bullying incidences in schools falling, because the bullies don't have any targets anymore.
Yeah.
Like, because those would be victims have put their hand up, or they've turned their
Yes.
back and walked away, or they said, I'm not going to put up with that. So that curriculum in terms of, and the bystander curriculum is really important, Rachel. So I think if we just spent less time on the perpetrator, because our policies and procedures should deal with that pretty expediently, right? And deal with those around the bystanders, the friends, the victim. I think we can start to get the lid on the sort of bullying that's happening. But it rages out there, outside of our control, and dare I talk about social media, but it does. It
Yeah.
rages away outside of our control. And again, the one-off presentation by, some guru talking about cyberbullying or whatever isn't going to change the situation for young people.
No.
They're necessary, but they should build a relationship with the school, an ongoing partnership, like your programs, Rachel. Your programs at schools are an ongoing partnership. They're not just a one-off event.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where some of the experts who work in the field, and there's so much in demand, so it's pretty hard for them to do a deep dive into a community, but they need to stay after that one-off presentation and support the teachers then, and upskill them through appropriate training to manage the situation. Because what a teacher does when they first see an incident is so vital for
Yes.
all the eyes watching them. And I think, and as you would understand this, most bullying does not occur in the presence of a teacher.
No, it's usually when the teacher turns their
right.
back.
But it occurs in the presence of peers. And so we can do all the professional development we like with teachers, but generally that best done when they're receiving a report and how they respond to it. Not so much when they see it firsthand, but what can we do to help children who see it, put a lid on it.
It's absolutely about preparing children to understand how to stand up for themselves and how to not be affected by bullying. But I suppose it starts when they're very young, so it's quite a challenge. And you mentioned too much time being spent on the perpetrator. I wonder how the perpetrator is actually supported to understand that what they're doing is not the right way to go, and how they can be supported in their own well-being, because usually, as we know, people who do bully are possibly facing some challenges outside of school, or in their personality or their ability to manage their emotions or their anger, and that's when they lash out at other children. But I wonder how it can be a more holistic approach for both the victim and the perpetrator, or teaching kids that they're not victims, that they do have a choice in how they respond to bullying. And I know schools are doing so much work in that space now.
They are, right? And so in terms of, schools with restorative practices and that, so I didn't mean to suggest that, that you shouldn't spend time on the perpetrator, but I guess time on the investigation, I think schools now have realised there is a lot of work they can do with the bully or the perpetrator, a lot of work they can do, and they are doing that. And I think that's where there's been a significant change, in bringing those people to realise that their behaviours aren't acceptable, in a school community, and working with them on that. So that's the whole partnership thing. If a child's involved in something that the school's not happy about, let the parent know straight away. But let them know from a dialogic perspective, as opposed to, well, there are some consequences I've got to apply. You better just listen to me while I tell you what we're going to do.
Yes. No, it's a very challenging space. And I think that, definitely parents need to be aware of how to teach their children those skills as well at home. And I suppose that's partly the challenge, is that many children may not have boundaries that they need to be able to be a bit more disciplined in their behaviour. And I suppose that the fallout of impact of that is at school, when they're let loose in the playground with other children, and they've got that, I suppose, freedom to exercise their powers and that sort of thing. But yeah, so it's interesting to learn or to understand how schools are managing that.
Mm.
Mm.
It is, and the thing, parenting is hard work. It's much harder these days than probably what it used to be because of the distractions and the disruptions, and children having access to all sorts of connections that they never ever did. Generally connections used to be just physical, but now they're online and social. So it's a really tough gig for parents. But if you throw in the challenges of maintaining a household and managing cost of living increases, and parents having to work longer hours, take on more jobs, again, they don't have the availability, do they, to work with their young people. So we get this situation where everybody's in their own quarter, so to speak, doing their own thing, and they don't just meet often enough. The breakdown of the family meal, where you used to
Yeah.
sit around and have a chat, it sort of, that's disintegrated pretty much, and that is a problem. So when our families speaking together with each other, talking about issues and challenges, that's pretty rare, isn't it? So because parenting is a tough job, because of all of the sort of forces that parents have to deal with in shaping their young people's lives. So it's not easy, but working with the school is a good antidote,
Mm.
because then then you're talking about the people who may not spend 24 hours a day with kids, but are spending most of the time with kids. Just got to get on top of that time then they're spending in their other social environments. Many of such, they don't even know who they're talking to, but you sort of got to then try and manage that. But a strong school community with parents involved and understanding their roles and how they can support the school and how the school can support the parents means that some of those other influences are going to be marginalised or minimised.
Yes, definitely. Now, I want to touch on the topic of teacher retention with you now,
Mm.
and what you see is the challenge at the moment in the schools actually retaining their teachers. Do they invest more in the current teachers that they have, or are they seeking a different style of teacher that they know is going to be able to manage the challenges of teaching contemporary teaching? What are some of the ways that you're supporting schools in, I suppose, maintaining their staff and making sure that they are managing and coping and really being able to, um, I suppose, manage the demands of their roles?
Mm. The, the crux of the problem is we're running 1900 style teaching employment practices, right? So pretty much the teachers engaged in the old industrial style engagement. The hours of the day haven't changed when teachers are expected to work. The classrooms generally still look a lot like they used to, So we have this problem where the teaching profession, if you like, or what it looks like for a teacher's like from an employment perspective, hasn't changed for 100 years, pretty much. Some will say we've made some gains. Yeah, I guess we've now got maternity leave and there's compassion. So yes, there are some things changed, but fundamentally the way a teacher shows up at work and leaves hasn't changed. Yet the world has changed. The other professions have changed. So I think we have to move to understanding well what the particular teacher's world is like if we want to retain them. Because I think they're losing interest in teaching as opposed to losing interest in the school where they might be working at. So the biggest problem I'm seeing with retention is people not leaving the school for disaffection, but leaving the profession because they're disaffected. The generations are different in terms of how they want to spend their time, who they want to spend the time with, their value that they put on family, their value they put on their own well-being. All of that has changed, but I don't think we have responded well enough to meeting their needs. So getting to know teachers as we do children and personalizing their experience. If you have to let someone come in and of course the moment you do this with one person, you create a precedent and someone else wants it. But it may be, for the sports coach who's been on the netball field all afternoon Saturday might want to come in at midday Monday, and we have to be able to facilitate that. So, and or a teacher might want to teach a particular class remotely for a period. They may have a good case with justification. We just have to get used to that teaching is going to look different.
Being more
Lots of schools have
flexible.
been Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Lots of schools are very innovative, but in the mainstream they're not. They're still, set in their old ways. So I don't think we've made sense of what the next generation of teachers want. So why do they choose other professions, other work arrangements, other workplaces? It's because they're more appealing to what their particular needs are. So the retention to me is a big profession-wide issue rather than a particular school issue. So the answer at a school level is do everything you possibly can to provide some flexibility, some recognition that people might want to do things a little bit differently. The move to in many schools where they've moved away from face-to-face parent-teacher interviews, for
Yeah.
example, more innovative solutions where they could be done online, teacher could be at home doing whatever it might be. I think we just have to embrace some of the workplace changes that are happening in the big world and in other professions to help us hang on to our teachers.
And we're seeing a lot of new graduates opting for CRT roles that
Mm.
give them the flexibility of casual work, fairly reasonably paid, so they can do other jobs at the same time. Are you seeing an increase in that as well?
Absolutely. There are people who would happy be on the supply roster
Yep.
because it gives them some sort of sense of control and ownership. And that's a big thing for the generations that we're looking at now. They want to be consulted. I found this that they wanted to have their say. They didn't want to tell you how to do their job, and I weren't telling me how I did. They knew I would make the ultimate decision, but the consultation was terribly, terribly important. We want to know what's going on. We want to know where we're headed. What's the next direction the school's taking and how that's going to impact on me. So highly effective communication and dialogue and engagement with your teaching staff will help you retain them because they feel like they're part of the machinery of the school's organisations and operations. And that has been a shift in terms of the generations. Current generation, I want to know a lot more about a whole lot of things.
Yeah.
That's just how they
They want to be
get
able to
by.
travel whenever they want to, and I suppose there is that sense of freedom, isn't there?
Mm,
And how is that going to impact students, though? I suppose in a primary setting, it does impact students quite significantly because they need that consistency,
mm,
and to a certain extent, I suppose in secondary as well. But a lot of children seem to not be able to cope if their normal teacher is not in the classroom, if they have too many emergency teachers.
mm,
And how is that, I suppose, how are leaders going to manage that if that's common practice in the future?
mm. It there's a tension here with I think the parent perspective about the continuity of the teacher. That is probably one area where I would have got most criticism was, oh, my child's got another teacher, or that teacher's on maternity leave. That means they've got to have another teacher and so on. And it's a reasonable argument to carry when we say that the teacher is so important in terms of the learning outcomes for the child, and particularly in a primary setting. But where we have moved to with digital learning, and particularly the way COVID made us rethink what constitutes a lesson or what constitutes learning and how that can be delivered, I think there's an opportunity, to provide alternative learning experiences. And because technology is available, then that replacement teacher, whoever the short-term exchange teacher might be, they should be in a much better position to carry on and have a smoother transition in terms of their association and relationship, with children than ever before. Online digital records are available, Google Docs and all that sort of thing. So I do think that there's an opportunity for us to break down that sort of stigma where it's only one teacher that matters. And
Mm,
my argument was always to put quality teachers before children, irrespective of what their teaching role. So investing in the teaching profession in terms of high quality teachers. But there's a problem in this country with the status of teachers. If one of the great success stories is Finland, and they're widely reported, but it's valid. It's the status of teachers in Finland. Graduates want to go and become teachers. The status of teachers in this country is pretty low. I mean, there have
mm,
been renowned academics and leaders in the public service and have argued this for a long time. How do we change the status of teaching? Well, one way we need to change it is to move away from the 1900s model of employment and engagement and what schools look like, to change that. So
Move with the
it's
times.
yeah, it's complex. It's not you and I can't solve it,
No.
a chat for an hour here together. But that is part of the problem, is the status of teaching. And there have been reports, and studies have been commissioned. There've been some wonderful outcomes and findings, but they just haven't been taken up by government. Government
Mm,
has not increased the bundle of money available to fund schools across the country. And so then you end up with this fight, don't you? Who's getting the funds, and it's not about that. Increase the whole pool of investment. Clever countries invest significantly in education, much higher than our country does.
yeah. Yes, we can't solve all the problems in the world or in education, but it's really good to have conversations like this just to raise awareness and really understand what is actually happening in education, what the challenges are that we need to overcome. And yeah, it is a pity that there's so much investigation into the issues and reports that come out, and then nothing gets done about it. It's quite disappointing, but I suppose in raising the conversations and raising awareness of this can assist in some way to get people talking about it and doing something about it. And
Mm.
so it's been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you today, Paul,
Mm.
and
Thank
hear
you.
all of your expertise. And I'm sure every person who listens or watches the podcast will be inspired by your advice and your experiences. And perhaps you'll be working with a few more schools after this interview as well, who could
Oh,
use your
mm.
experience and expertise as well. So, is there
That'd be
anything else
that
you'd
would be
like
a neat
to?
spin-off, Rachel. That'd be a neat spin-off if that was the
Yeah,
outcome. But look, I'm really pleased to have been given the opportunity to spend some time with you, and support you in your work, which is really valuable.
thank you.
I certainly believed in it as a principle, and the value of strong, effective parent partnerships. I think if I just one final thing from a leadership perspective and principal leadership, it would be good if we could unshackle, some of the burdens on school principals to conform and comply with
Mm,
certain policy directions, which some of them are pretty poorly founded anyway in the first place, not backed by empirical research or evidence. So, and that's what I try to do with my developing leaders, is support them in ways that they can feel the courage and the conviction to do what they know is right and what they know is best for their communities. So yeah, I would like to see them unshackled from some of the bureaucratic burden that
mm,
they have to, and then that fear factor too. There's this: if you get it wrong, you're likely to be investigated. The Office of Children's Guardian will be down on you. If you don't conduct your investigation according to the copybook. So I think, yeah, if we can try and unshackle that, so that means strong leadership development programs. So it does mean bringing leaders to the position of principal, where they have strong knowledge and awareness and understanding, a good journey that gets them there, and a strong awareness of what it is to be a leader. I'm not saying our current principals don't have that, but investing in principal leadership in the journey, and then once they're in place, particularly the early years, what happens? Principals get into positions and they feel as though they're meant to know everything and be
mm,
able to deal with all sorts of contingencies. But when they get into the role, that's when they need the most support. And often they're reluctant to reach out because it exposes them. I'm not good in this
yeah.
area, or I need support in that area. So my final point would be leadership development, unshackling leaders, but developing and investing in them, so that they get all sorts of support for the work that they have to do.
Yeah, well, even the greatest CEOs in the world have support around them. They have their own coaches and people who are giving them advice. And yeah, principals should be no different. And there shouldn't be any shame around seeking help, because it is a tough gig. And yeah, we really need more support around them. So yeah. Well, thank you. That's a great
Right.
way to finish our session today. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing people's responses to the interview. And yeah, thanks for sharing with me today.
Thank you for the opportunity. I've really enjoyed it, Rachel. Okay.
You're welcome. I'll be in touch.
Thank you.
Well, what another inspiring interview in our Leadership in Education series of our Creating Connections podcast. If you enjoyed this interview and would like to learn more from other leaders in education, please click on the subscribe button to receive further podcasts on your feed. If you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, click on the link below to book a meeting with me to learn more about you and your leadership in education. Or if you're listening to this podcast, send an email to rachel@practicallylearning.com.au to express your interest in being on the podcast. If you are a school leader or teacher with aspirations for leadership, but you're challenged with self-doubt, overwhelm, and whether you have what it takes to take that next step, our Connect with Your Mind Mastery Coaching Program can support you to work on your own self-mastery to become the leader you aspire to be. For further information about our coaching and professional learning programs, please visit our website at practicallylearning.com.au or click on one of the links below and visit our podcast for our future series of interviews to support you as the adults who are guiding children on their learning journey. I do hope you enjoy the rest of our episodes on our Creating Connections podcast, and I hope to meet you soon.